Have you ever picked a side before you knew the whole story? That's how I felt while watching Mufasa, the Lion King, with my son recently. Many parents have seen or heard of the children's story, The Lion King. Well, the movie Mufasa is the origin story of the lion cub who would be king. But while the focus is on Mufasa's journey to become king of the jungle, I was paying equally attention to his brother, who later became a villain and his main enemy in The Lion King. We all know him as Scar, but in Mufasa, which is the prequel to the original movie, he's a cute lion cub named Taka, and he sings the first song in the movie about always wanting to have a brother. And that wish comes true because Taka ends up saving Mufasa when he first sees him by warning him of alligators in the water. Then he helps him survive by losing a race on purpose, and later again against a stronger white lion. But when they get bigger, Taka ends up betraying Mufasa by leading the white lions to Malele, which is supposed to be like a safe place for all the animals. And by the end of the movie, he has his name changed and becomes Scar. Yet, if you've seen the movie, you'll know that he gets the scar on his face from a buffalo while saving Mufasa. And it becomes this mark, a permanent wound, one we can see as well as one we can't see because it represents an emotional wound as well for the lion since he internalizes the pain he goes through in the movie. Now, Taka, who becomes Scar, was originally supposed to become king because he's here to the bloodline which his father constantly reminds him of, while Mufasa, who later becomes the Lion King, is actually an orphan that came into the Pride Lands. But once jealousy and betrayal enters the picture, Taka's flaws are emphasized, overshadowing the many times Mufasa was helped by him. And it was just interesting to watch because as viewers of the original movie, we're now learning in this movie about Scar's backstory, how he internalizes the guilt of his betrayal, how he and the other animals minimize the good he's done. He even gives himself the name Scar. And I think what viewers can learn from this, yes, as adults, is that sometimes it's not our mistakes that eat away at us and blocks us from the greater or from a greater destiny. It's the inability to forgive yourself. That's what I saw looking at Scar, who even, as I said, gives himself a name that will always remind him of the past. Now, I'm not a Bible scholar, but I do know that there are many instances in the Bible where God tells us to let go of the past, to forget the old, to dust off our feet. Literally, shake the dirt off and move on. And this is because He knows that as humans, we make mistakes. And if we spend too much time dwelling on our mistakes, thinking of the things we regret, we then become stuck. And shame ends up stealing our story. That's what happened to Scar. Shame from one incident steals his hero story. So here are 8 lessons we can learn from the character Scar in the movie Mufasa. The first is that unhealed wounds can cripple your identity. In the movie, Taka's transformation into Scar was more than a nickname. It becomes a new identity for him. The injury was visible, yes, and it becomes this turning point because he internalizes the hurt between himself and Mufasa. The other animals in the Pride Land, at the end, they wanted him vanished, but Mufasa refuses based on their past history or their relationship as brothers. However, Scar no longer saw himself as a protector, and by the end of the movie, even the way he holds his head, kind of like in this downtrodden way, reflect his psyche. It isn't as before where, his head is up and his face is visible. Instead, like his shoulders are slumped, his head is angled downward. And I think when we as humans have unhealed wounds, we start to believe that they define us. But a moment of pain should never become a permanent label. The second lesson is that forgiveness begins within. Scar's biggest tragedy wasn't what he did, it was that he couldn't forgive himself. In his eyes, the one mistake he made outweighed the times he had saved his brother. Mufasa does tell Scar that he can't forgive him. However, here's where we have to realize that if you've wronged someone, sometimes you have to forgive yourself. That other person may not forgive you. I've never personally been in the situation where I ask for forgiveness and aren't forgiven, but I know that there are people who walk in this earth who have made mistakes that they have not forgiven themselves for. And I think it shows up in addictions, in being overweight, in letting people abuse them, in insomnia, in many ways. But self-forgiveness is what keeps guilt from turning into self-destruction. The ability to forgive yourself is what will crumble a self-built wall of isolation. The third lesson is that comparison breeds resentment. Taka grows up in Mufasa's shadow, but early in the movie, we see that he's actually the faster lion, and he has his own strengths. He's smart, he's strategic, but none of it begins to matter because he compares himself later on. We humans do the same thing. We always seem to look at other people's strengths too, instead of looking at our own, which causes problems down the line. So focus on your own strengths. The fourth lesson, as much as some people look at their past mistakes, why not look at your past successes? So even when you've stumbled, don't forget who you've been and what you've done right in your life. Number 5, don't let bitterness grow in silence. Scar never speaks up about his pain. Instead, we watch him self-isolate. Silence can be a breeding ground for resentment, and this is why talking it out, whether in therapy or with a counselor or someone you trust, and sharing some of your truth is healing. Number 6, don't let labels, especially those given by other people, become a cage for you. After the Buffalo incident, Taka chose to call himself Scar, as I said. So it was like a declaration to the world and to himself that he was marked. And from then on, he lived as if he were only that, a scar. What we say to ourselves, what you call yourself will always matter. And as a listener, I encourage you not to wear any past mistake as a name tag, because your story is still being written. My 7th point is that tragedy can change the best of us, but it doesn't have to. Now, I personally don't have any serious mistakes I've made in the past, but I have experienced tragedy. And I mentioned being hit by a SUV in college and having to learn to walk again in a past video on Pretty Privilege. And let me tell you, traumatic experiences will change you. Like, you can't get around it. But it's how it changes you. How do you change? Because we always have some choice in how we change. Many people become hardened by tragedy, while others are able to overcome them. And finally, number 8 is recognize your own value. The thing about Scar's story, I think why I paid attention to it is like he didn't recognize, I mean, it's a fictional character, but he didn't recognize his own value and he began to feel overlooked. For example, he liked the female lion, Sorabi, but she ends up liking Mufasa. And again, it goes back to when I mentioned about comparison. You can't truly see yourself if you don't recognize your own value. We know that a fresh scar and a heel scar looks different. Like if you nick your foot or your arm and you get a scratch or a scar, you know that when it first happens and there might be blood or it might be red, and then the next day and the next week it begins to fade, it looks different. And it also depends on how you treat the scar, but scars can fade. But in the movie, viewers saw a scar literally fade in the background. He shrinks within himself. And in real life, people fade into the background of their own lives too. We've seen these YouTube videos about main character energy, and it's like, who else is supposed to be the main character in your life story? Taka was once faster than Mufasa. He was aligned with potential, and one moment ends up defining who he is. His story is tragic because he loses sight of himself, and true sight can't be given with someone else's eyes. Physical scars can fade, but sometimes they can only fade but so much. It doesn't matter how much ointment and so on you put on it. Other kinds of scars, the emotional and mental ones, only you and God can determine how they fade. And because we know that scars can fade, we also know that healing is possible. But unlike Scar, whose story was written by man, you've got the power to write your own story. Your scars, whatever they may be, are not your identity. Thank you for watching this video. Please share it with a friend and tap the like button so more viewers like you can find it.